All right, we're a little late, but we'll get the committee of the whole meeting for Tuesday, July 9th called to order. Please call the roll.
Alderman Strelchuk. Alderman Talaco. Alderman Meyer. Alderman Hancher.
Here.
Alderman Bach is absent. Alderman Parrish.
Here.
Alderman Bratt.
Here.
Alderman Gebhardt is absent, and Mayor Nurbin.
Here. First up is approval of the meeting minutes from June 11th.
Move approval.
Motion and a second. Comments or questions or corrections? Hearing and seeing none, all in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the minutes are approved. Next, we have a discussion item, a review of proposed updates to the city's financial policies. And Administrator Jones is going to walk us through a quick presentation on what we've been up to for several months in F&P.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the committee, and thank you for your patience, members of the committee, as we wrapped up several items on our Finance and Personnel Committee agenda this evening. I've prepared a short slide deck to run through here this evening to just sort of encapsulate or explain the process that's been underway since January of this year. As you will recall, as we worked through our strategic plan update earlier this year, this is a council and a committee objective that we were looking to complete in 2024, reviewing and updating our financial policies. We currently have 18 statements, policy statements, included in the suite, which were last updated in 2018. And as I mentioned, this review began in January, and we just wrapped it up at committee last month with the final policies on the agenda. Most of the changes, as you've probably seen in the packet before you this evening, are mostly non-substantive and in many cases clarifying edits to further explain and clarify the meaning of some of the words included in the various policy statements. And as also noted in the memo in advance of this evening's discussion, like a lot of things that we do here at the City of Mequon, updating the code, updating our annual fee schedule, our financial policies can be updated at any time. So this is not the only bite at the apple that we'll get here in 2024 as part of this organized and formal process. We can update our policies whenever the need may arise. Before you on the screen is just a quick listing of our current policies, and this first slide, which contains 9 of the 18 policies. These are really the core financial policies that govern a lot of the day-to-day financial management that we otherwise exercise as staff and as members of the council in our day-to-day operations here with the city, and as we go through annual processes like the audit and the budget, which will be kicking off here in a couple of weeks. We've also got a number of other policies that are a little more specific to some of our day-to-day operations and some of the programs that we've introduced over the last number of years. Some of these policies, while less core financially, also relate to some of the requirements that we otherwise have within the city's municipal code. So these are the listing of 18 policies that we currently have in place. As you can see at the bottom of the screen, vehicle leasing and payment card acceptance, when we introduced credit card payments for the public, those are recently developed policies that we've added to our collection. So as I mentioned, most of the updates are very minor in nature, and a few of the more noteworthy miscellaneous updates that I just wanted to bring to the committee's attention here this evening include the fact that we've updated our mission statement in the financial policies to reflect what's currently in the city's strategic plan. We didn't have a strategic plan back in 2018. We've also suggested amending the fact that the budget will be produced and forwarded to the council by September 30th rather than what's currently listed as September 15th. Due to some of the reporting that we rely upon from the state through the state retirement system, employee health care, other numbers like transportation aid, we typically don't have those numbers until late September. And so being able or making it possible to get you a budget by mid-September really can't happen. And so we want to just provide a little bit of a grace period there. And certainly we're interested in getting you the budget as soon as possible so that you have ample time to review it before we jump into our Appropriations Committee meetings in October. A couple of the other major updates, there's a new reference to the annual financial report. It's now called the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report per industry standard, and so we've reflected that throughout the policies. And then we're looking to add another policy called the basis of budgeting. Currently this exists within the appendix section, of the financial policies, and we'd like to establish that as a separate policy and pull it out of the appendix. And now what I'm going to do is just move into a couple of the policy statements where we have some changes that we thought would be worthy of some explanation and discussion here with the committee tonight. The first is our fund balance or our reserves. And as you may have seen in your read through the financial policies, staff is recommending an adjustment to the unassigned fund balance range for both the general fund and the sewer fund. Currently, the range is 10 to 12%, which is equal to about 45 days worth of reserves for our general and sewer funds. We're proposing that that range be expanded to 10 to 15%, which would give us the opportunity to build a reserve over time, which is closer to 2 months and in line with some of the recommendations that we've received from both rating agencies that have rated our debt in previous bond issues, being Standard & Poor and Moody's, as well as GFOA best practice, the Government Finance Officers Association, which, regardless of size, recommends that any unit of government have a minimum fund balance equivalent to 2 months. So this would be one of the more substantive changes that we're asking you here to consider this evening. Moving on to cash and investments, this was the topic of some discussion at the committee level last month and even going back a couple months when we initially reviewed this policy. We've added some language indicating that our idle cash is to be managed by a designated investment advisor. Now that's been our current practice for many, many years, but it was never listed in the policy, and we want to make sure that we codify that in the policy update that we're going through here as well. And as part of that language update, the investment advisor must invest the city's idle cash or available funds in accordance with our investment policy. It also specifies that the investment officer, which in our case is the finance director, may modify or reject any proposed transactions recommended by the investment advisor within 24 hours. Previously, we didn't have that caveat within our policies, and Alderman Gebhardt was nice enough to come in last month and join staff in meeting with our investment advisor, and we're recommending that that item also be included in the update. There's a couple of other updates relative to cash and investments. You can see them here on the slide. Our advisor typically comes in once or twice a year to meet with the Finance and Personnel Committee, and we had them do a thorough review of all of the proposed updates, and they recommend that the council approve those as such. Moving right along, policy statements number 7 and 9 revolve around capital funding and debt issuance. And really two major updates here to note. We've added language to clarify that capital project funding does not lapse at year's end. We use a sinking fund policy for our various capital projects and our capital funds, like equipment replacement, like squad car replacement, like road maintenance and road resurfacing. And we like to build up those balances so that we can take on projects without borrowing money in smaller sums. We've also added flexibility to this policy to extend debt obligations beyond 20 years as may otherwise be necessary. You'll recall during our strategic planning workshop in May, we talked a lot about facilities and our long-term facility needs over the next several years. We may find ourselves looking at a bond issue longer than 20 years, in order to fit that debt service in under our existing ability to pay. So we want to provide additional flexibility beyond 20 years as may be necessary. So those are the two major changes relative to capital and debt. On the purchasing front, another one of our major policies within the 18 policy suite, we have clarified some of the information relative to the reports that are furnished monthly to the Finance and Personnel Committee. That information going forward will include a description of each item purchased, the firm or the vendor that we're purchasing such item from or service, and the amount paid. Previously, it wasn't clearly specified in the policy what had to be provided in those monthly reports. We want to make sure it's clear as a bell to anyone that's reading those policies or charged with administering those policies. The purchasing thresholds have also been adjusted in a very, very minor way. You can see that previously we had a threshold from $10,000 to $25,000. Now it's $10,000 to $24,999. We're just trying to be as accurate and precise as we can because anything at $25,000 requires council approval. So a tweak there. And then unless approved, any contracts that come before the council for approval that have an automatic renewal, we have to call that out in the contract and in the resolution in order to have any automatic renewals for service agreements. So just to explain that in real terms, let's assume we have a service for janitorial maintenance of this building, and we bring to you a contract, a 3-year contract for $75,000. If the contractor is performing satisfactorily and we have 2 automatic renewals in there after 3 years, after the 3-year term, we cannot exercise that automatic renewal unless you've approved that as part of the contract consideration. So any automatic renewals need this body's blessing before we as staff are authorized to execute those at the end of the contract. So that's in the purchasing policy. And then we're going to be looking to eliminate any purchasing language from the code after we get through this policy revision process here, hopefully next month. Because right now, we've got purchasing requirements listed in the city code. We've also got them in our financial policies, and it's really hard to manage both documents, and it's sometimes confusing for people looking in from the outside or people inside the organization. We want to make sure there's a one-stop shop for our financial policies, and that relates specifically under this tenant for purchasing. Moving right along, a couple of tweaks relative to employee credit card usage. We are going to maintain a monthly credit limit of $3,000 per employee. Any non-designated staff, and that would be department heads, executive assistants, or deputy directors who have a credit card must be approved for such by either myself or the finance director. We have monthly departmental division limits that we're recommending for inclusion, which include the finance department for $35,000 and the information technology division at $25,000. Those departments often have the ability to identify purchases that we can make with a credit card that actually accrue to the city's benefit because we get a cash back provision for using credit cards. And so we want to give our finance department, which pays all the bills, as well as our IT division, which makes larger purchases across the organization, the ability to utilize a credit card on some of those larger expenditures, assuming they've been approved by the council if they're over $25,000, in order to earn some of that money back by using a credit card. And then we are also looking to memorialize online approval procedures that were introduced for credit card processing of the monthly bills in 2023. Wrapping up here as we move through the last of the policies, long story short, we're looking to eliminate the elected officials' travel policy and combine it with the employee travel policy. If an elected official were to travel on behalf of the city, there is now language in the policy whereby the mayor must approve such travel. We are also specifying that anyone requiring a rental car for travel on behalf of the city not sign up for the insurance that comes with that rental car, because those coverages are provided through our normal business insurance for the city. And the travel policy also reflects an increase that was approved last year in the daily meal allowances by the council, equal to $60 per day. And then lastly, and we've got one of these on the agenda tonight, when we get to the council agenda here in a few moments, under our donation policy, we've included some language that we're now going to utilize donation agreements to reflect our change in practice, which has occurred since 2018. And these donation agreements can be used in lieu of the donation form, which are also included as part of the policies. And it also provides an exception for staff to participate in any community building or capital project campaigns as may otherwise be necessary. Again, I revert back to our discussion a few months ago about facilities and our long-term facility needs. Supposing just for a moment we have a fundraising component to building a new pool here on the civic campus, we would certainly want to allow and make provisions for staff to be in a support role relative to those efforts, so that we can offset any donated funds for the benefit of our taxpayers. So that really kind of wraps up the major changes that we're foreseeing and recommending that the council consider as part of this update process. As you will recall, we reviewed a draft sewer funding policy at your meeting last month during the Sewer Utility District Commission meeting. That was moved forward, and we're going to include that as policy statement number 19 in the final suite of policies that ultimately comes to you for adoption. Assuming there are no major concerns here this evening, we would bring back the full suite of policies for you to formally adopt at your meeting in August, on August 14th, via resolution. And as I mentioned, if we don't get something right, or we overstep, or we miss something as part of this concerted and formal update, we can always go back and amend any of the policy statements at any time. So that takes us through the slide deck, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have. I'm joined here this evening by our Assistant Finance Director, Marie Kaiser, who played a key role in this update process that kicked off back in January. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from members of the committee? Like Will said, we'll talk about it a little bit now, and then we'll vote on it formally next month. But let's get some feedback out there now. Alderman Meyer.
Just a couple of things. One is that for using the credit cards for the $35,000 and $25,000, so you can take advantage of any cashback stuff. I think we should have some language inside there, or to the fact of that, if there's any percentage charged by the credit card companies, that we don't use our credit cards then, because that is just defeating the purpose. If they, and I'm talking about, if you use a credit card, you have to pay an extra such and such as different companies are doing now, and for that credit card purchase. I'm not talking about the finance rating inside there. I'm talking about above and beyond charge that a lot of places do right now. So if something like that comes on the invoice, we do not pay with the credit card then, because that's just defeating the purpose of getting cash back. We're paying it at one end and getting it on the other.
So Alderman Meyer, if I'm hearing you correctly, if there is such as you reference a convenience fee,
Correct.
We want to dissuade staff from utilizing credit cards for those types of payments.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments, Alderman Meyer?
Go ahead with Rob. I mean, I had a couple more, but go ahead.
Oh, if you got a couple more, just rattle them. Well,
I was just going to build on that,
Okay.
except for in emergency situations, like if we want to list out, like if you need something critically fast for IT, I think I'd be accepting if they just needed to get it, and it would put the city in a negative position to not have it. What we built in with that in F&P was an approval process through the city administrator or the finance director on that. just to allow some of that flexibility.
No, I'm not asking for them to have come to approval at all. I'm just saying that if there's if there's a charge that comes through that way, and so there's a convenience fee inside of that, you know, that we just pay for through funds right away through the city, instead of going through our credit card. Yeah. I guess that's fine, yeah, I guess.
We'll take a look at it and try and artfully craft the language to reflect the discussion.
Yeah, and the other thing was that for bonding, why don't we just, you know, say 30 years or less instead of going 20 years, and because if it's just leaving that open at the 20 years or whatever also. I mean, well, as a company policy, would try to strive to be at 20 years, whatever it is, but I mean, we probably should put a number on that that everybody would be comfortable with bonding instead of just leaving that wide open.
Happy to include that. You know, our practice in the 10 years I've been here is always to keep our debt short. We've never taken on an issue more than 15 years. I think we'll continue to do that as a practice, a good financial practice, but if 30 is the magic number, we can include that.
And it depends on what the common council wants to do, but.
Sure.
And the final one was that, you know, every time we do for bonding, Moody's and other people recommend that we increase our funding inside the general fund, you know, they have inside of there and it's always been 10 to 12% inside of it, you know, and now they're doing 15. And they always say it's kind of detrimental to ours, but it never really shows. I mean, very slight variance inside of there, but not much when it comes to that. It was always under the understanding that, you know, that taking more money and putting it inside of that fund is actually like overtaxing people that we really don't need to do. In all the years of being here, we never really got to that dollar figure that we needed to do that. The 10 to 12% was always fine, and most of the time we used 10% when we had budget times to take care of any type of funding that we wanted to do but couldn't provide for the normal revenues side of it. You know, I'd be more comfortable in keeping it the same way that it was, unless the rest of the common council wants to increase at the end of the 15. But I think that with the companies telling us that, you know, it has to be this way or that, you know, it doesn't reflect anything upon the city's rating that much and anything on it.
Well, as professionals, we feel it's our duty and our obligation to share with you the information and the feedback that we're getting from like professionals in the industry, and we wanted to make that part of this process. But you know, the range approach that we've taken works very well because the fund balance is never just one number. It's not static. It's always changing relative to where we are in any point of the fiscal year. I guess the one point I would offer up relative to expanding the range, it not only meets the 2-month minimum as recommended by GFOA, it could provide this council or future councils the opportunity or the flexibility rather to have money within your approved fund balance range to take advantage of a purchase opportunity if it arises. And I'll just use an example of the property that was just up the way here on the other side of the street that the council was considering several months back. And that money, if the council were to look at seriously acquiring, say, property or taking advantage of a market situation, would more likely than not have to come from fund balance. And to the extent that you have flexibility within your range, you may be able to, or you may be positioned to take advantage of those opportunities when and if they arise. So I just throw it out there, and really it's the council's decision, probably the key decision relative to these updates here tonight. Thank you.
Alderman Parrish.
Thank you. I was part of the Finance Committee, so I don't have a lot of comments. And Will, nice job on your presentation, too. It was a good overview. But I'm gonna just keep going on the reserve topic, cause that was also where I was hesitating, and I didn't quite remember discussing that change in our meeting, but it's helpful to know there was additional meetings where you kinda hashed it out. But I'm trying to understand the net effect of it, because it's not required, so it's correct. So if we say it's gonna go up to 10 to 15%, the 15% it's just a recommended threshold. It's not gonna affect our annual budgeting process. It's just kind of a best practice, correct?
That is correct.
So I don't know that aspirational budgeting, I get that it's a best practice. And having come from the Finance Personnel Committee, we have 200 million in borrowing capacity. So if we're worried about the sky falling, I mean, unless the debt markets collapse, there's tons of borrowing capacity if, after that month and a half. So I'm a little hesitant to make cuts in our annual spending so that we can build up this reserve, and I'm equally hesitant to do any sort of increases in the annual tax obligation to build up the reserve. So then in my head, well, why are we doing it? But I also respect your recommendation, so I probably would like it bumped down a little bit, but I understand where you're coming from.
I think that's the irony is we're also in charge of where it ends up at the end of the year when we do appropriations committee, which, well, it's not even the end of the year, it's just a couple short months away. So yeah, it may not change anything functionally. We're at what, 11.7% right now.
11.6.
11.6. I was 10th off. So if we don't change anything, we're likely to end up close to 11.6. I think functionally would allow it allows about another $500,000 to accrue, rough terms, if the opportunity arose. But it may not arise because we also like to keep the tax rate low, and I'm not sure how it would build back up. Maybe we'll get a lucky year. This year is not going to be a lucky year. We're going to end up with a couple $100,000 left. We threaded the needle very tightly. We're going to end up with about $9,000 left at the end of the year. Was our latest report. So, great job budgeting, or we probably managed it pretty tightly. Alderman Strelchak.
Yeah, I just wanted to, bring up the discussion that, that we did have, with interest rates when we discussed this months and months or years ago, I was going to say, with interest rates in the 2-3%, the difference in borrowing and the city rating were, if we dropped a rating or two, it didn't make really any appreciable difference financially. But with the interest rates being higher as they stand today, it definitely is something that's in consideration. And I forgot exactly what was stated in FNP when she came in and she talked to us about it. I remember clearly that if we did raise it another percentage, we were at risk of our rating dropping, and it was more quantitative than the evasive number that you're referring to. Like, I pushed, they always say that we should maybe consider bringing it up a little bit, but they never give us a reason why or what it actually does. So I pushed a little bit with some of the questioning that we had. And the answer just seemed a little more concrete that raising it 1% or 2% would have some advantages, and I think that's why staff came back with those recommendations.
So is the request to maybe have a little more concise summary of that come next month? We're not voting on it tonight. We're just providing
Agreed.
feedback.
Yeah, I think if we had a financial summary as to what it does for our city rating for borrowing, because as we're looking at things like the pool, right? And we're also looking at the civic campus and some of those other things. Borrowing during that time will likely increase, or at least be voted on to have an opportunity to increase. Borrowing at the best rate is definitely advantageous to the city, and if we can increase our fund balance by 1 to 2% to achieve that, it's a nominal difference that benefits the taxpayers long term at the time of borrowing. That rating doesn't happen overnight. It's something nice to have so that borrowing opportunity is there at the best rate available.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, good discussion. We'll get another swing at the pinata next month when it's back for in resolution form. And we'll have
Thank
a
you.
couple more members who will probably provide additional input when they're back.
Well, we've recorded some feedback here this evening that we'll incorporate into the documents, and then bring those back with the changes as otherwise proposed with a resolution formally adopting the financial policies as updated here in 2024. And we'll seek to provide that additional information next month. Thank you.
Do we need any formal motion or recommendation from this body to move things along? It doesn't sound like we do.
Nope, we'll get that formalized next month, or just open discussion to provide some feedback. And open the aperture a little bit. 3 members here got to see it along the way, and there's 5 people who didn't, unless you were reading all the packets, which would be extra credit for those not on F&P. Any last comments? Of course, there's always time before the next meeting if anything jogs a neuron after the meeting here. So that brings us to informational items, the Committee of the Whole planning calendar. If anyone had any feedback on that, I'll note that next month's going to be a busy one, so a longer Committee of the Whole work session, because we're not gonna move Alderman Bach's item again, because he may lose his mind. So a longer discussion next month, so come with a full meal in your belly and probably have a long meeting, but that's okay, because this one's going to be short. With that said, is there a motion to adjourn from Committee of the Whole?
Move to adjourn.
Motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are now adjourned, and we'll